is the pastor of Waters Avenue Church. If you haven't checked it out yet, you should. He loves music of the rock variety and plays in a band called the Cast Integral. He loves hanging with his wife and 2 kids and is looking forward to the fast approaching birth of his 3rd child. Who's kind of with us tonight. Yes. He tries to think of the intersection of philosophical inquiry and the theological reflection and hopes to discover for himself and the people around him the tools to create a world of common good for all people. Beautiful.
Yeah, I want to. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Keep
that volume.
Keep that volume. Hey, everyone over there, come over here. There's the pastor coming out. Yeah, I want to do exactly what my bio said. Try to sit in the intersection of philosophical inquiry and theological reflection to discover tools for our world, right? Tools for ourselves and tools to build the world we all want to see, which hopefully you want to see a world of good, right? For all people. That's a big goal, granted, right? To say like he wants to see a world of common good for all people. What does that even mean? What does that look like? What is a good life? What does it mean to live well? Right? These are questions that philosophy tries to answer. Philosophy is a discipline that asks those kind of questions we're calling, not that we coined this term, but that we're using ultimate concern. Philosophy is the discipline that asks questions like, who am I? What is God? What is fear? Right? All of those things that we do around these nights. Questions relating to our deepest, most burning questions. Yes, I said questions twice in that sentence. And as I'm looking at it, it's so poorly written. Questions that maybe we either live with constantly, right? And have angst over. Or maybe the kinds of questions that we ignore, that we push down, that we unintentionally or intentionally avoid so we don't have to think about them. Either way, they're important questions. And we kind of intuitively understand that. And I love that philosophy asks those questions and tries to formulate answers. But there's that second part of my bio too, right? Thinking about life as the intersection of inquiry and reflection. I feel like theology and philosophy go hand in hand. They're very closely related. While philosophy uncovers the ways that humans interact, the ways of being that they enact for themselves, theology tries to give shape, to imagine ways of being in the context of that which compels us, that which is ultimate for us. When you hear the word theology, you may think of particular doctrines or dogma or religious structures. You may think of tools to bolster a certain kind of way of being religious. But don't think that. That's not what I say. That's not what I mean when I say the word theologically. You actually don't have to be religious explicitly to think theologically. You don't have to have a certain religion or even a set of defined beliefs about metaphysics or ontology to think theologically. Theological thinking is just thinking around those things which make ultimate claims on our lives. So whether you give the ultimate the name God or something else, it still functions the same way. So tonight, I want to do a little bit of the inquiry and a little bit of the reflection, right? The first part will be answering the question, what is fear? I want to explore how it is and how it functions within us. I want to explore the impact that it has on us. And then I want to reflect on whether there's a way to live outside of that fear or at least unencumbered by that fear. And if there is a way, how? So what is fear? I, like Whit, tried to think of my own definition, right, before just pulling something out. If you notice a definition off of like Google, out of the dictionary or something, like the one that Jenica read, it always uses the word fear in the definition. But don't you learn in like 4th grade that you can't define a word by the word, right? Fear is the state of being afraid. Well, okay, thanks Google. So I tried to think of a way to describe it. I came up with two similar things to win. The first one is the same as her first one, right? It's this kind of hormonal response to danger, right? That fight or flight feeling. That's not really what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Yes, we all kind of have this thing that arises in us that makes us decide how we're going to act in the face of a bear attacking us or something, or someone holding a gun to our head. And there's plenty of amazing stories out there of people like defeating bears and whatnot. But we're not going to talk about heroics, because that's not typically what most of us face in our day-to-day. The second definition that I kind of tried to come up with is what we'll be talking about a bit tonight. I'm calling fear, and there's different kinds of fears. I welcome you to dwell with this and sit with it and come up with your own definition. Hopefully something I say inspires you to something more. But I think this one works, at least in the sense of giving us something to hold on to and hopefully giving words to some of our own emotions. I'm going to talk about the kind of fear that is the apprehension at the unknown nature of the future results of our actions. I know it's a mouthful, and that's how philosophy goes, so deal with it. Apprehension at the unknown nature of the future results of our actions. Apprehension, of course, right? Like a sense of anxiety or worry, or maybe a negative emotion. The unknown nature of the future. I can act in any way. Hi. Great.
She's acting in any way else.
Yeah, it's perfect. We have no clue what's going to happen moment to moment, too. Like, no clue. You could be talking and an awesome cute little baby can walk up. You don't know. And I can respond a certain way, and I don't know where that's going to take me or the people around me. And that fear of acting and not knowing for sure what's going to result from that action is a very powerful emotion, and one that drives our actions. This apprehension towards the future results of our actions kind of sometimes circles around the fear of loss. Loss of life, loss of power, loss of influence, loss of acceptance, loss of community, things Whit mentioned. We worry about how it is that we'll be perceived by other people. Most of our fear, I think, the kind of fear that would bring us tonight together to listen, right? The kind of fear that we all know deep down probably needs to be addressed for us to live well, is that kind of fear. We can say that this kind of fear, right, this deep-seated angst towards the unknowns of particularly relating to other people, results in our need to control what happens in our lives. There's plenty of examples of this posture towards life that so many of us take. Not wanting to sit with the empty space of another person. Right? Have you ever felt the feeling of, rather than being open to the prospect of the disrupting, absurd chaos that is an other, you fill the space with small talk. Right? You fill the space with something surface level, chatter. I'm going to tell you a story. It's really embarrassing. Some of our most embarrassing times are when we let this fear and this will to control take hold of our actions with another person. There's a guy that goes to our church. We have a food bank every Monday night from 6:30 to 8. People can come and get free groceries, whatever they need. One of the guys in our church, his office they do a food drive every 6 months or something. And he's like, hey, actually we have a market, we could use that food, let's raise food for that cause. And his boss was like, great. So his boss, they collected like 1,000 pounds of food. It was awesome. Boss comes because he wants to like see the place they're giving, right? He's gonna do a little promo video for his work, you know. We all want something out of our charity. And he comes and he, oh my God. He comes up to me and he's like, hey, I'm so-and-so from whatever office, whatever. And I don't know why, but when I was confronted with meeting him, I was fearful. I was like, I don't know this guy. I want to have a good impression. I want to be accepted by him. Like, I want to come off as like cool and important, whatever. So I start rushing into things. And rather than just letting him be to me what he's going to be, I just like, oh wait, I'm repeating everything he says, right? I'm like shaking his hand really fast. And he says, hey, Chris, I'm so-and-so. And I go, nice to meet you, Chris. And then, instead of just backing off, right? I could have just backed off. No. I'm like, my name's Chris. I don't know why I said that to you. I'm Chris. You're not Chris. I'm just running my mouth. So stupid. Then, after all of that, right? He's talking about what was he? I said another really dumb thing to him. Oh yeah, this guy, the coworker that I'm actually friends with. His name's Keith. And Keith will do this funny thing sometimes where when we leave an event, he says, "Glad you got to see me." So I thought for sure, right, that Keith working with this guy, that this guy's heard that from, that's Keith's like catchphrase. So I just, when the guy's leaving, I'm like, "Glad you got to see me." And right? And the guy looks at me like, what? And again, did I let it sit there? No, I had to try to be. Keith says that to, he's never said that to you. The need to control the narrative with the people around us leads us to embarrassing situations at the best. It can lead us to worse things, as we'll see. We can also think of people as problems to be solved, right? Rather than sources of learning, sources of the unfolding of our lives. Think the small example of traffic. And when you're in traffic, do you look at other people as like human subjects, as like radical, like beings of acceptance or whatever? No, you look at them as an obstacle to your life. And we can do that not just in traffic, of course, but we move through life that way. We have interpersonal issues, like having a narrative in place of a person before we even know anything about them. Why do we need that? Why do we have to have a story with us about another person? I think the reason is without it, we may face that terrifying prospect that perhaps we might have something to learn from that. Perhaps the lives we built that we're trying to make run smoothly have something more they could be. That maybe we're acting in a way that hurts that relationship. Maybe if we open ourselves up to learn from another, our life becomes more complex, more demanding than we had ever imagined. And so these are things that we avoid because we're so afraid at all costs of losing the control of our lives. We think that we have a perfectly normal life if we can just avoid the fear of another person. So what's the impact then, right, of this fear of the loss of control? Well, we live small, right? Whit gave us a beautiful personal example of that. We can get stuck in a place where we realize that we do things we don't want to do, and then we don't do things that we do want to do. Do you ever feel that way? I do. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were like talking about that concept, and I said, you know, man, I feel like everyone in culture has that to some degree. I feel like if you go to anyone in the street and said, are there things you want to be doing in your life that like you just haven't done? Of course the answer is going to be yes. Do you feel like there's like things in your life you'd like to stop doing, but you just can't? Of course. It's a ubiquitous feeling in our culture. Why do we feel that way? Why do we have dreams or goals that we have for ourselves that we never act on? It's because of this fear of the unknown, of the results if we take an action towards those goals. Also, fear keeps us away from connection to each other, right? We stay at arm's length from each other because we fear that we might be forsaken, not accepted. We fear that we might be spurned or ignored if other people actually knew us. So we either stay surface level with people, or we imagine them to be a certain way to shield ourselves from the impact of their potential rejection of us. This inaction, right, can play itself out in small ways, like I said, but it can also play out in really, really big ways. Right? This fear of the unknown results of our actions can keep us from being imaginative in structuring our world for good. Have you ever listened to people talk about politics with each other? Issues related to politics? it seems that if you listen to people, everyone kind of generally agrees that things are broken, right? That systems or structures aren't as they should be. And so we often hear maybe someone propose some kind of like fundamental shift or some kind of radical approach to improvement in any given situation, right? Whether it be the poor or immigration or violence or whatever it is. But if someone says something that's like too fundamentally different from what we have, you'll often hear this response, right? That says, well, we can't try that because the results we get might be worse than what we have now. Have you ever heard that? I hear that all the time. Well, if we introduce this, then all these bad things will happen. But we have no proof of that, right? We never tried the crazy thing. We never tried the radical thing. But we can't try it because the consequences might be worse than what we have now. Fear of the unknown future keeps us from acting in our world. And that's often tied up with our own personal fear, isn't it? I know that things aren't great in many places of the world. I know that this kind of person or that kind of person maybe struggles with life, with even just living, with basic human rights. But if I'm honest, truly honest with myself, if I slow down and listen to what's inside, there's this story. I know that things are pretty bad for some people, but they're pretty good for me all in all. And I'd rather not give that up. Now, we don't say those things out loud, of course, right? That would make us look really bad in front of other people. And we may not even say those things to ourselves. But that fear, I think, does lie at the bottom of most of our inaction towards the well-being of other people. We trade the best for the good. Why? Because we're afraid. So this fundamental fear of the unknown results of the way we act in the world, is there something that can undo it? Right? That's the question, right? We could all just be like, well, we figured out what is fear and leave, but we all really want to be able to move through it. In my tradition, Rachel has me listed as the theologian, if you look at the thing for tonight. I'm not a theologian, but I try to play around with theology. In my tradition, Christianity, we have this text that says, love, when it's made complete, drives away fear. That's kind of an interesting concept, I think, because many times if you said to someone, what's the opposite of fear? You might get the answer, courage, bravery. But in this text, the opposite of fear is love. How can love undo fear? Well, if we just define fear the way we did, right? Well, we have to define love. Because again, I'm not trying to say that falling in love romantically with someone can help you fight a bear. Although we do, again, have stories of that. That may or may not be the case. But what I mean, right, is not that kind of fear. So how does love undo this fundamental fear of the unknown results of our actions? The person who wrote that said that perfect love will drive away fear, made the point in that same text that fear has to do with punishment. So remember theology. You don't have to believe a certain thing to think theologically. It's just thinking through that which ultimately concerns us. You might not even believe there's a God. You may not have any conception in your mind about a supreme being who would punish you if you did something wrong. Right? You may never have in your mind the question of punishment for your personal actions. But if you move through life with the acceptance of other people as your ultimate concern, then you've got the exact same fear as somebody who fears a divine being. It's all the fear of losing acceptance. But living first, right, as though we're loved, and then living towards others as though they are loved, can strip away the fear that we've discussed. Right? So this idea is that love made complete will drive out fear, because fear has to do with punishment, but love is acceptance. Right? There's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to punishment or loss of acceptance. Rather, you are radically, at your fundamental nature, accepted, loved, appreciated. This is why, right, this same author who said that, in the same text says God is love. Right? In other words, love is the ultimate thing. Love is that which grounds us. That love is that which binds us together. Love is the universal principle, a fundamental force of the universe. And you may hear me say that and say, that's bullshit. Love isn't a fundamental force of the universe, right? Love is not built into our quantum mechanics. I don't know what I'm talking about. Just stop me now, right? But what you're left with, if you don't put love as ultimate, if you don't get love the highest possible place, is fear. If you don't give acceptance the highest place, not only in your own life, but in the life of others, you're always going to act out of the fear of other people and the fear of your own self. There's this monk named Thomas Merton who had a really great quote about some of these issues. He said, the beginning of love is to let those we love be perfectly themselves, rather than to twist them into our own image. Otherwise, we only love the reflection of ourselves that we see in them. And we can hear in that quote that love is the relinquishing of the kind of control that we've seen is rooted in fear. So I would just like to say that I hope that you could, in some way or another, embrace love. That you could look at yourself, as Whit has done and so beautifully shared with us, and say, I am accepted. There's no fear I have of another person saying anything against me. And when you can embrace that for yourself, which is a daily task, right? And you can also look around at other people. And rather than saying like, well, they're in the way of my life, they're in the way of the control of my circumstances, see them as just as radically and fundamentally loved and accepted as you are. This, I hope, I believe, I trust, will drive us away from fear and lead us into the kind of actions where we all work together for the good of ourselves, for the good of each other, and for the good of our world. Thank you.